Hey, welcome back. I've previously talked about the potential threats of World War III, both from a conventional forces perspective and a nuclear war perspective. Today we're going to cover a few risks, things that may not be thought of as traditional warfare, but are definitely risks, potentially. We'll get into them one by one. Now, for this video, we're going to be using the Ron White Elevated Threat Level Scale. If you're not familiar with this, there'll be a link in the description that covers that in more detail, but this basically covers two different phases. The first phase is find a helmet. The second phase is put on the helmet. Pretty simple. Now, let's start by talking about bioweapons. Now, for this, we don't really need a helmet, but let's wear a camo baseball cap. Now, there hasn't been a serious bioweapon attack that we know of. But at the same time, in the last few years, we've seen China float balloons over the continental US and parts of Canada pretty much unopposed. And yes, we can shoot them down. The F-22 and an AMRAAM will do it. But we've seen China has the capability to do that and float something over. Could that thing that floats over spray out the bottom? Probably. Does China have the ability to create bioweapons that could be sprayed out the bottom? Don't really know, but on the same side, or the same time, the reason that there's so many people thought COVID came out of a Chinese virus lab is because China has labs studying viruses. Like, I don't know if COVID actually came from there. I don't want to touch that in this video. But at the same time, the reason so many people thought it was a possibility is there's, what's it called? The Wuhan Institute of Virology is a thing in China where they study viruses. So could China potentially deploy a bioweapon across the US? The potential's there. Now, let's move on to trade. And I think we're going to upgrade from the baseball cap to the camo cowboy hat for this one. Trade is definitely a big deal between the US and China. And China stopping trade could very much hurt the US. Like, for example, the hat I'm wearing was probably made in China. Pretty sure it's Rothko. Made in China, yep. A lot of the consumer goods we use in the US are made in China. If those stop, life in the US is going to potentially change. Now, at the same time, if China suddenly stops trading with the US, it's going to hurt them too, and quite a bit. Is it going to hurt China, and specifically the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese leadership, to the point that they might lose control of the country? You know, the potential for a civil unrest and overthrowing that, maybe, probably not, but maybe. So a trade war kind of would hurt both of us almost equally. But sitting in the US, it definitely has the potential. Now, let's go down to terrorism, and we're going to keep this hat on. I just did a quick search, but as we all know, lots of people come across the southern border into the US through Texas, Arizona, and California. There's definitely vulnerabilities there. Like, anybody who says the border is completely secure and nobody's coming in that we don't know about is full of it. Now, just a quick Google search here, and this was actually done a while ago. Back in June, a Chechen who was in the US illegally was shot by a US Army Special Forces colonel near the colonel's home. Why was he there? We don't quite know. What was he doing that caused him to get shot? We don't quite know. But it's definitely a question. And I'm going to post links to these things if somebody wants to double check the stories. Also in June, six members of ISIS-K, suspected terrorists. They're suspected terrorists until something goes boom, and then they're actually terrorists. But 6 members of ISIS-K were arrested that had come across the southern border. If you're not familiar with ISIS-K, these are the guys who did the mass shooting attack in Moscow earlier this year. They're not nice people. And then in August, a Jordanian illegal alien was arrested for trying to successfully breaking into Marine Corps base Quantico in August. My understanding is him and possibly two people, I'm not quite sure if it's one or two, managed to drive like a van rushing through the gate and managed to bust their way through the gate before being stopped shortly on base. But the key thing is these dudes tried. Supposedly there have been multiple breaches of Quantico. I'm not entirely sure on that. But in August there definitely was. There was a dude associated with ISIS-K who was arrested who was potentially looking at a terrorist threat to the U.S. election. I don't quite know if that was a mass shooting that was planned or what the specific nature of that, but he was planning a terrorist attack on election day that was canceled. Now, let's move on to cyber. Now, I work professionally as a software engineer, so I've got to be a little careful about what I say. Excuse me, I'll put on a plate carrier. Level 3 plus plates, stop rifle rounds, ARs, AKs, most things. Anyways, that on. Due to my job, I really am not allowed to discuss anything kind of adjacent to technology. Excuse me, I'll put on a ballistic helmet. So I can't really discuss specifics of cyber threats. It'd just be a conflict of interest, so I can't go into that in too much detail. Yeah. But with that said, what should you do about any of these things on a daily basis? Honestly, not much. You really can't, yeah, I'd avoid large crowds. Sorry, it's messing with my neck. Big crowded venues, big events that are potential terrorist attacks. Yeah, sure. For trade, there's not much you can do. Be aware things might stop coming in. For this. Terrorism, I already covered that. Bioweapons, not much you can do. I mean, if you're in an area where the air is suddenly toxic, well, bye-bye. If you're in an area where the air isn't suddenly toxic, yay! But really, I don't think there's much you can do about that. My helmet's not quite on straight, sorry about that. And I can't talk about cyber.